One analyst is predicting a dark, cold winter for all of us here in South Africa. Clyde Mallinson is warning that we could face up to stage 11 blackouts unless Eskom improves the performance of power stations. He joins me in studio for this very grim, or should I say dark conversation, Clyde. Before we even unpack what stage 11 could potentially look like, you just heard the president saying there that there's no territorial battles between the three leaders that are trying to fix this Eskom issue, but many are looking at the situation and saying he's probably not telling the truth. What is your opinion of the current spat between Gwede Mantashe and Pavleen Gordhan and Khusienso Ramakgopa, who have all been tasked to deal with this energy crisis?
Man, I think that the energy crisis requires a collective response. So you do need policy change, you do need things to happen to stop load shedding, you do need to get governance at Eskom working, as the three ministers have said. But all of those things are interrelated. They're not separate silos, as it were. How can you stop load shedding if the regulation doesn't allow for new generation to be procured by Eskom? So there's been a very poor procurement strategy for new energy. And it's pretty much what's got us into our state, the state we're in now. So now we're trying to fix the fact that we stalled our procurement process. And in the meantime, while that procurement process was stalled, you've had grift and graft and theft and whatever going on in Eskom. So all of these things are interconnected. And then when we see the little green shoots of communities trying to do something, that seems to be squashed as well on a policy technicality. So, you know, I don't really want to comment on whether or not the different ministers are squabbling with each other. The country, we need to move past that. We need to see an action plan being implemented, not an action plan being spoken about.
Yeah, but how do we do that? And I'm glad you bring out that court case that is now not allowing communities to generate their own power and to some extent become self-sufficient and independent of Eskom. Your thoughts on that, and the fact that even the courts are not allowing for us to relieve ourselves, if you will, from the crisis that we're in any way that we can?
Right, I think the court took what I call a shortcut. They threw it out on a technicality, and that's often a way of saying I'm not quite sure how to deal with this. It's above my payroll. It's too complicated. So let's just pause it for a moment. Look, there's two sides to the story of small communities providing power and being let off. The whole point is that the system operator needs to be in control of the system in order to enact load reductions to stop the grid from going down. And you can imagine that if small communities start doing their own thing, not with the system operator fully in control, it adds a level of complexity. So if all the small communities did it, we kind of would be in a position where we would all be much better off. But I think Eskom are just a little bit cautious of, if one of them does it, will it set a precedent? And I think the trick that's being missed there is that solutions for alleviating load shedding, starting with small communities, probably need to have a storage component with their solar. Because that's the thing, you know, Eskom will come and say, well, it's cool, it happens. What about the day when the sun's not shining that well? Then you're going to come back to us. So there needs to be a balance there. And I think that I would like to see rapid policy change there, and I would like to see that systems would be put in place that would allow communities, rural communities, towns, cities, metros, to actually start supplying themselves. There's no question about it.
Yeah, but what would those systems look like? You know, you talk about some kind of balancing act that needs to be found between Eskom and the communities. Those systems that would need to be established, if you could maybe just paint a broad picture of what they would need to look like.
Look, I'm busy doing a project for the Public Affairs Research Institute. There's a wonderful director there, Tracy Ledger, who recently published a book called Hungry for Electricity. I've done most of the work on the metros. I'm looking at the smaller municipalities, and collectively, the biggest impact we can have in the country is to stop load shedding in the towns and cities and metros, not necessarily to give a bigger portion of green electricity to the mining companies. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but the multiplier effect of removing load shedding from towns and cities will be much greater on the South African economy than sorting out some of the big intensive users. So the answer is towns and cities should go out and purchase wind and solar from independent developers, put battery energy storage in their towns and cities that allows them to basically run the whole town and city as if it was on a UPS, like you and I might do to keep a bit of electricity. And the exciting bit is that they actually save money. If all the towns and cities did it, just enough to stop load shedding, they would save, let me get this right, it's about 12 billion rand a year on their bills.
Yeah.
And then the best bit is the people in the towns and cities would be afforded an opportunity to have an ownership share in the wind and solar and storage that is supplying them. So they then build up essentially a pension fund for themselves. That's the way to go, but it's down to logistics now. We need can you think of anyone you would want to appoint in charge of a logistics exercise? No. Yes, you can. Imtiaz Suleiman.
Yeah.
Imagine how he would sort this out as a logistics exercise. We're going to get the ports. We're going to sort this. How are we going to move the solar panel? That's what we need. We need a rapid action plan to actually get this. The time for talking is over.
And Mr. Imtiaz and his team are a gift that keep on giving, aren't
Exactly.
they? Let's get on to this issue of stage 11.
Right.
I mean, stage 6 is already quite scary when it does come. But what would that even look like, and how do we get to that point if we haven't already?
Right. Let me quickly just clarify something. I'm forecasting that we'll have a shortfall of up to 11,000 megawatts at some points during this winter, generally for short duration over peak times in the evening. The gap between what we're able to produce and what the country's demanding will be 10, 11,000 megawatts. That's the gap. Now, the way Eskom make that gap up is they're able to get 2,000 megawatts of the 11 from the energy intensive users, and they do that by curtailing them. They don't switch them on and off. So you can't switch a mine off and then on again. You can't switch a smelter off and on. So the energy intensive users who use about 10,000 megawatts have what's called load curtailment. They have to reduce their load for the whole time that load shedding's on. So it's not like 2 hours on, 2 hours, whatever. They have to reduce their load the whole time. And they generally can reduce up to 20%. So that gives us two stages of load shedding. If they go beyond 20%, many of them would say we've got to shut down now.
Yes.
We can't. You can imagine a mine or a smelter, it can kind of trim and chop and save, and then you say, boy, if I've got to go to 30%, I might as well shut down the whole shop, retrench everyone and go home. So they limited more or less to 20%. Now the rest of us use about 16,000 megawatts on average. And we are the ones that have to be load shed. So when we're short of 11, load shedding will go to stage 9 because we'll get the 2 from the energy. But stage 9 is already more than half the day without electricity. It's difficult to imagine, and I'm hoping that if we do touch stage 9, it's for very brief periods. In other words, between 5 in the afternoon and 8 at night, and then it will revert perhaps to stage 6 thereafter.
Yeah.
It's a capacity shortfall.
Yeah.
And so there really needs to be a call on the cold winter night. The very time you want to use your heater, please don't use your heater. That's basically what it boils down to.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, as you're talking, we've got the constant breakdowns that happen, the maintenance that's currently happening at the different power stations, and combined with the energy intensive users who then have to now maneuver how much energy they use. How do we prevent getting to even a stage 9?
Well, at the moment we don't.
Yeah.
We're speaking in past tense. How could we have prevented?
Yeah.
Is better phrase. So this winter, let's just hope that next winter will be better, but this winter is going to be very tough, and it's not difficult to make a forecast, because you just look at previous winter demand patterns.
Yes.
And you look at what Eskom currently are able to muster, and you subtract one from the other. It's kind of like standard 6 arithmetic, you know. What's 34 minus 24? You know, well, and that's where it is. So it's quite bleak. It's actually very frustrating that we've gotten ourselves into this particular mess, as it were, because it's so unnecessary.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a question that you'll probably get asked over and over again, but is a total grid collapse inevitable at this stage? Because people are talking about a complete blackout that would take us a while to get things up and running again. But just based on the current developments that we're seeing and the uncertainty of how leaders should create policies that take us out of this rut, is a complete grid collapse inevitable?
I think we have a very good system operator and very good structures would be put in place to prevent a total grid collapse. I've often spoken about, you know, stage 9 with a shortfall of 11 to me is akin to a total blackout.
Yes.
If you know, I often refer to it as a technical knockout in boxing. You're still on your feet, but you don't know where you are. Kind of. So you sort of don't know which schedule you're on. But I want to give you an example of where South Africans can help us not going into total blackout this winter. We've got 14 million houses in South Africa that are connected to the electricity grid. 14 million. You have a cold winter's night. Everyone wants to switch on a heater. Let's pretend a heater only uses 1 kilowatt. I think most of them probably use 2 kilowatts. If 14 million people switch on a heater that each uses 1 kilowatt, that's 14,000 megawatts added to the load, whatever the load was before they switched on that heater. That just gives you an indication. Now, I think the tragedy is that we've gotten ourselves as a country where we've got those 14 million households who want to switch on a heater. One of the reasons many of them don't is simply because they can't afford to. We're actually saving the country from a national blackout because 10 million households are in energy poverty. They can't afford to switch that heater on. So we don't even ask them, please don't switch it on. They can't afford to. And that's the tragedy, and that's what we should be tackling in combination with sorting out load shedding. It's a wicked problem. It's not load shedding, this, it's that. It's energy poverty for 10 million South Africans that should be at the core and the heart of our discussions going forward. And we should be straining with every ounce of our ability to solve that affordability question for those households. Then we can start worrying about solar on the roof and I'm okay, Jack.
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Yeah, and then just a final thought from you then, based on what you've just described, the just energy transition that we're currently talking about and trying to kind of be on the rest of the global stage when it comes to this. How do we then work on that when you've just described what you have in terms of households not even having access, let alone load shedding to begin with? That just energy transition, how does that look like for South Africa based on the challenges that you've just described?
The future looks absolutely marvelous because we have the solutions to empower. I'm looking at triple the electricity output by 2035 at half the cost with uncapped electricity for 10 million households. That's the aspiration. My aspiration isn't to get the coal fleet back to 70% EAF.
Yes.
My aspiration is 3 times the electricity by 2035 at half the cost with uncapped electricity for 10 million households. That's the aspiration, and it's absolutely achievable. And the best bit is it won't cost us money, it will save us money. It will save us money compared to what we're paying currently. It will save on health, it will save on climate. And if we take a plan like that to the world, the just transition isn't about sorting out some jobs from people who work on the coal mines. The just transition is bringing electricity to South Africa at an affordable rate, not just bringing the means, but bringing the financial means. And that's what it's all about. And until we understand that that is at the core of the issue, we'll go on arguing with different ministers about who's got what responsibility. It's sad, given what can actually happen.
Yeah, it's sad indeed. But thank you for breaking down all of those details for us this morning. Thank you very much for joining us in studio. That is an energy expert, Clyde Mallinson, joining us this morning to speak about the energy crisis and the opportunities that are low-hanging fruits for government and related stakeholders to take hold of.